So, if you haven't been paying attention to the news, or maybe you have and you just want another person's opinion on this whole situation, there have been a lot of reported drone incursions across the world, especially along the eastern seaboard of the United States and specifically in New Jersey. No one has really nailed down what specifically they are, but I kind of wanted to give my perspective as a drone pilot on why I don't believe they are at least DJI drones and probably not any sort of hobbyist or consumer or even really professional grade drones that are available on the market right now. A lot of people in my personal life have been wanting me to chime in on this topic and have been asking my opinions on the whole situation. So I'm going to come right out and say that I have no idea what's going on. I'm not there in person. I don't know what it looks like out there. I can only go off the videos I've seen really on the news or on Reddit, and then from a couple of my friends who actually live on the East Coast that have been telling me what they've been seeing. So I'm probably going to do a couple different videos on this topic, but again, for the main portion of this one, I want to talk about why I don't think they are DJI drones or hobbyist drones.
We don't know what they are. That's what we're trying to find out.
Identified, of course.
Nobody knows what they are. We have to find out. We do not believe they are U.S. military drones.
So first things first, all drones in the United States above 0.55 pounds are required to be registered. Especially when it comes to DJI drones, you have to activate the device by binding it to your DJI account before you can really even take it off. You are also legally required to register your drones above 0.55 pounds with the FAA. That's a fairly easy process. You just go in there and give them your name, give them your serial number for your drone, and once you've done that, all you have to do is affix the FAA given number to your drone so that if it crashes or anything happens to it, they're able to identify exactly who it is. Kind of the same process for any sort of aircraft that's in the sky, whether it be planes or helicopters. If you see on the back end of them near towards the tail, they will always have an N number. That's the unique registration to that vehicle, kind of like a car license plate. Sort of a more new rule that's come out recently in the United States at least, although it's pretty much going to be standardized all over the world, is all of these drones that are above the same weight that must be registered have to broadcast remote ID, which is essentially drone's version of the ADS-B transponders on standard aircraft. ADS-B for planes generally broadcast the takeoff point from the aircraft, its flight speed, its altitude, its GPS location. They also broadcast where the planned stopping point for the aircraft is, called a flight route or flight plan. These are all very easily seen on apps such as Flight Radar or Flight Aware. Flight Radar 24 or Flight Aware. I highly recommend getting one of these apps because it's just useful information to see where various aircraft above you are headed to, what their flight speed is. You can even see what their N number is on them. For drones, Remote ID broadcasts the takeoff position of the drone, its altitude, its speed, and its serial number. The Remote ID is a more recent addition to the requirements in order to fly drones, and it's to essentially help find out where the drones are at any given time, as well as where the takeoff is, which is where you will most likely find the pilot. There are apps for checking remote ID broadcasting from drones. I haven't really found one that's worked all that well. I have even tried to check out the remote ID on my own drones when I have them in the air, and 9 times out of 10, I can't even locate my drone on it. So it's a kind of burgeoning, emerging technology that is coming from the FAA, and it's only going to get better to track where they are as drones become more and more commonplace in everyday life. It's going to be a technology that's going to be needed, especially to help avoid any in-air collisions. Drones are becoming more and more commonplace in agriculture, in law enforcement, in firefighting, and even in deliveries. And it's very important that anything that's in the air be broadcasting its information to each other so we don't have any in-flight emergencies. So all of my DJI drones broadcast remote ID. They come standard built with it now. I have 2 drones that don't automatically broadcast remote ID. That's my DJI FPV and my DJI Avata. In order to fly my drones, not just legally, but it won't let me take off or really fly them at all if they're not connected, I have to connect my phone via hardwired USB cable to the drone goggles themselves. And then I have to have the DJI Fly app open on my phone at all times because it's essentially using my phone to broadcast the remote ID. All of the other drones that I fly come with it built in. If you home build a drone, if it's over above 0.55 pounds, you're legally required to put a remote ID module on your drone, which you can buy and put on. So if these drones that were flying over the various places across the world were DJI drones, they should be broadcasting remote ID, which would be easily viewed by the FAA or local law enforcement in the area. They have better tools than I do to see what drones are flying in the area. They've been using them pretty frequently to catch people flying drones where they shouldn't be. There was a story recently where someone was flying their drone around a military base and they found him very quickly. I read a story about a month or two ago about someone who got caught flying their drone over a restricted airspace over a concert, and they got a letter from the police about 2 days later saying, hey, we knew you were flying in the area, you need to come down for questioning, essentially. So if you're broadcasting remote ID, the authorities have a pretty good way of tracking you down. And everything I've seen so far is none of these drones appear to be broadcasting remote ID at all. So if all of these drones that have been reported as part of these drone incursions were DJI, that means they've been retrofitted to not broadcast remote ID, which would take a fair amount of software or hardware planning to block it. I still really don't think that's the case, for various reasons besides just the remote identification. Another kind of mark against them not being DJI or hobbyist drones is a lot of them have been reported as being car or even school bus sized. There's really no DJI drones or hobbyist drones that are anywhere near that size. The two closest contenders would be the DJI Agras T40 or the DJI Flycart 30. The Skycart 30 and the Agras T40 share essentially the exact same airframe, same propellers, same essentially, the whole setup is exactly the same, except for the T40 is built to hold pesticides in a 1.5 gallon tank, and the Skycart 30 is able to deliver cargo either by landing and dropping it off or through a winch system. Both of these drones have the same camera on them, and they're not what I would call great camera quality. They're meant for steering the drone. They're not meant for good photography, videography. They're not LiDAR or infrared, meaning that if they were flying them over civilian areas just trying to get photos with a drone this size, A, it's a little overkill in size, and B, I don't know what information they'd really be able to gather with the cameras on them. Is it possible that they added something onto them to do their scanning, whatever they're doing with them? Possibly, but again, those are the largest DJI drones that I know of, and I really don't know what they'd be used for in this circumstance. One other thing drones have in common with manned aircraft is the red and green navigational and anti-collision lights. These are to signify which way the airplane is traveling, mostly up in the air. They're on the wings, so you can see if you have certain colored light on one of the wings, you can tell the airplane is either flying away from you or towards you. Drones are the same thing. They also share the red and green light color signature to figure out whether the drone is flying towards you or away from you. Most aircraft also have some form of white landing lights, which again, DJI drones have. They have a automatic auxiliary light that turns on underneath the drone when it's landing, but it can also be manually turned on. So that's why there's been a lot of false positives when it comes to identifying drones versus planes, because when it comes to the lights, it's very easy to get them mixed up. So that's why when it comes to seeing a lot of these sightings of so-called drones, a lot of them are showing up as airplanes, which is one of the big reasons why you want to have a flight app such as FlightAware or Flight Radar 24 to double check whether it's a drone or a plane. Probably one of the biggest marks against these not being DJI drones or hobbyist drones in general is the Geo Fencing feature, which basically is the GPS map built into the drones, especially DJI's FlySafe database, that has certain areas where you cannot take off or fly into an area using the drones. These are places such as constricted airspace around airfields, military installations, and wilderness zones. No drone zones, essentially. There are ways you can fly in restricted airspace, mostly using Lance authorization, which you can acquire via your phone, certain apps on it, and even in more restricted airspaces, as long as you're talking with the tower, you can legally fly in these places. The Lance authorization is pretty easy to get for certain areas. Some of it's automatically approved. Others, you've got to go through a lot of different paperwork and hurdles to jump in order to get it. And it's not always a guarantee that you're going to be able to fly there. For instance, a couple months ago, I wanted to fly around the Santa Fe airport. I was there on vacation, and I wanted to get some video of a creek that was right on one of the runways. I acquired Lance authorization. I was good to go, ready to fly. The drone still did not get the proper clearance through all of the online stuff to even take off near the area. It gave me nothing but warnings saying, nope, this is restricted airspace, you can't take off. That's one of the big things that makes me think these are absolutely not DJI drones or any sort of high-tech drone that uses geofencing at all. There's been several stories that have come out over the last couple of days of drones shutting down military base airports, shutting down civilian airports, the most recent of which I believe was Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
An alarming drone incident that forced one of the U.S.'s most critical Air Force bases to close its airspace.
Med Flight 8 Patterson Tower, use extreme caution for heavy UAS movement on the base. Security forces is handling the situation.
In order to fly anywhere near there, you're going to be flying through restricted airspace. The closest airbase to me is Beale Air Force Base, and just looking at the map of around that base, the restricted airspace zone extends several miles away from the base. So the thought of any sort of civilian grade drone being able to take off and fly close enough to these bases in order to disrupt air traffic enough that they were not taking any inbound or outbound traffic really leads credence to me thinking DJI hobbyist drones are not the cause of this at all. There are, of course, ways of getting around the geofencing, which involves you either writing your own software or finding software to essentially spoof your drone's location, which is what they're using a lot over in the Russo-Ukrainian war, because most of that is a no-fly zone over there because DJI really doesn't want their drones being used for warfare. So if these were DJI drones, someone could be using that software to spoof their location. But the fact it's happening in so many places all at once, I can't see it. I can't see that being the cause. You could also just not update the geofencing and FlySafe database for your DJI drones. But if you stop updating your firmware and you stop updating your FlySafe database, eventually the drones are going to have an issue and say, you need to update this before you can fly. I'm not saying that's not what's happening. I just don't think it's all that likely. I could be proven wrong. It's one of the things I'm very open and honest with on this channel is that I am happy to be proved wrong. It's how we learn, is we get things wrong. But it just doesn't seem likely to me. One of the most interesting reports I've gotten on this whole drone situation is the fact that several of these drones were reportedly pursued by police aircraft, such as helicopters that were tracking down these drones. And when they got close, the drones turned off all of their lights and went invisible on thermal imaging cameras, or forward-looking infrared. It is very easy to turn off all of the lights on your drone. It's called discrete mode. It's used mostly for law enforcement operations when you need the drone to have some stealth to it. I can easily do this on my drones. It just violates FAA rules and regulations stating that I need to have the anti-collision lights on, most of which is the flashing strobe light that needs to be seen from a minimum of 3 statute miles away. Is that a possibility that that's what's happening here? Could be likely, of course, but the not being able to see on infrared is very interesting to me. I know how sensitive my infrared cameras are on my two search and rescue drones, the Mavic 3T and Matrice 30T. I can go fly around some of my fields and I can see the tiny holes that rodents have dug out in the dirt simply because the ground is a 1 or 2 degree temperature difference from everything else around it. These little holes in the dirt glow-like beacons underneath the infrared, and that's just super small. My drones get pretty warm when they're up in the air, mostly from the battery discharging, and the motors that are spinning the actual propellers put off a fair amount of heat that would be very easy to spot with my infrared technology that I own, and the military and police own a lot better infrared sensors than I do. So if these reports are true and the drones are invisible in infrared, that would be very, very surprising to me if it was a DJI drone, because I can, again, see that heat very easily with what I personally own. The battery life and distance that these drones are flying is another knock against them being hobbyist quality drones. With so many reports coming out from these drone incursions that these drones are flying in from off the shore and flying in several miles and loitering for several hours at a time. The most I've seen is reports that they've been flying for up to 7 or 8 hours at a time. I don't think there's any DJI drone on the market or hobbyist drone on the market that's going to be able to stay aloft for that amount of time. The most time that one of my drones can fly is generally around 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how hard I'm working it. The only way a drone can stay aloft for that amount of time is if it has some sort of fuel cell in it that isn't just battery powered, because the more weight you add to a drone, the less time you're going to be able to fly, because the drones are acting like tiny helicopters beating the air into submission. There's no gliding aspect to them, really. DJI has no fixed-wing drones that I'm aware of to provide that little bit of lift from the gliding aspect of wings, like a standard airplane. They would have to basically have enough power on them to stay aloft for that amount of time while still compensating for the extreme added weight, which means these drones are possibly using some sort of fuel cell or some sort of hybrid engine that is, something like gas and electric, to provide power to the drone for it to stay aloft a lot longer. There are several drones out there like that, but they're really rare. And those drones, again, would give off a significant amount of heat and probably a significant amount of noise, because if they're operating off of any sort of engine that we use, something like internal combustion, they would be giving off pretty significant motor sound, I believe, and for sure a heat signature, especially a heat signature big enough to be seen on any sort of infrared camera. On the topic of noise, drones have a very significant sound profile to them when they're flying. It's one of the big reasons they're called drones, is they have a kind of buzzing drone-like bee noise to them. Depends on the size of the drone and the make and what it's built for. For instance, my FPV drones have a very high-pitched whine. My search and rescue drones have a very kind of deep bass hum to them. And then all of the larger drones I've seen, like the Flycart 30 and Agris T40, sound more like tiny helicopters, but even helicopters have a very distinct sound profile of the whop, whop, whop of the blades in the air. And then we've all heard the sound of jets and airplanes, making either the high-pitched buzzing noise of the plane propellers or the giant whooshing sound of the jets. A lot of reports I've seen is that these drones are not producing sound like any of what I've described. One of my friends who lives over on the East Coast says she had one fly over and she heard it, and she's helped me a lot with a bunch of my drone stuff, and she's been around a lot of aircraft, and she said it sounded nothing like it. So I can't independently verify that, but most consumer hobbyist drones are going to have a very distinct sound profile that if you've ever seen a drone in flight, you will recognize instantly. So all of these factors together make me believe that whatever we're seeing with these drone incursions all over the world, and especially in New Jersey and the Eastern Seaboard, are not caused by DJI or any sort of consumer hobbyist drone. I believe for sure there are plenty of false positives that might be these drones or are more likely manned aircraft, but with the amount of reports coming in on them, it's kind of still up in the air as to what they are, since everyone's being kind of tight-lipped about it.
Can you comment on the drones that are flying around New Jersey ports? It seems like the American people have a big disconnect.
The government knows what is happening. Look, our military knows where they took off from. If it's a garage, they can go right into that garage. They know where it came from and where it went. Something strange is going on. For some reason, they don't want to tell the people, and they should.
Have you received an intelligence briefing on the drones?
I don't want to comment on that.
These are all just my thoughts and opinions as someone who spends a significant amount of time around drones, using drones almost every single day, and has also spent a ton of time around military and civilian airports. I also want to say, since one of my most popular videos on this channel is about which 12-gauge shotgun round is the best for taking out drones, or at least reaching drone-shaped targets at certain range, do not go shooting down drones. Do not be flashlighting these drones. Do not be lasering these drones, because there's a good chance that you will be doing this to a manned aircraft, and not only will you go to jail, you will put a lot of people's lives at risk. So let me know what you think these drones are in the comments. Is it mass hysteria? Is it tons of false positives? Do you truly think that they are hobbyist and consumer level drones? What do you think they are? Keep it kind of respectful in the comments. Telling people that they're wrong, or telling people exactly what they are without any evidence, doesn't really help us at all. Everything around the situation should be looked at with a heavy dose of skepticism, but it should be investigated, because at the end of the day, we really should know what is in our airspace. Try and get good video footage of what's in our skies and keep posting it for analysis, because it's really interesting to see. Regardless of what it is, it's really interesting to see from an aviation standpoint how our skies look. I think it's always more important that we look up once in a while. So, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.